Welcome to the Richmond Alake podcast. This week, we are speaking of Shingai Majengwa. Shingai is amongst one of the confident practitioners that I've had the pleasure of speaking to so far. And it's no surprise that she's a keynote speaker, as well as an educator, author, board member, founder, director. You get the point. Shingai has a wealth of experience within the field of data science and machine learning. So our conversation will appeal mostly to future leaders, managers, practitioners, and directors within this field. So, I'm Richmond Alake, and one person at a time, I'm exploring the stories of the humans behind AI and data. I hope you enjoy this conversation and come away a better practitioner. Thank you for listening. Thank you for jumping on this conversation with me, Shingai. And I guess we can actually jump into the conversation. I want to start by saying, when I came across your content online, one word came to mind, and that's confidence. You speak with authority on technical subjects such as data science, AI, and analytics to both non-technical and technical individuals, but you're also able to hold dialogue with directors, business leaders, and company executives. So my question here to start the conversation is, how have you developed your confidence over the years?
Hi, Richmond, and hello to your listeners. Very glad to be here today. Well, thank you for noticing all those nice things that you've said. It's just experience, I would say. So my career started in retail analytics, and in right at the beginning of the story, I was having to share insights and tell stories with data to senior executives, country managers, marketing directors, salespeople in the retail sector. And speaking to those people, you start to pick up a few tricks. The first one is, if you are not compelling and if your content is not good, they will not stick around. In fact, sometimes when I teach, I talk about the CEO test. Like, how do you test that you have the right number of slides or the right slides in your deck? Well, the CEO test is that, is the CEO going to stick around past this slide? That's the question that you've got to ask yourself. And that's incredible training, because you really do have to know your stuff. And the worst thing somebody can do in an environment like that is say, Shingai, the data's wrong, because that derails your entire presentation and your everything you're doing. And so I just created this really healthy paranoia, and it made me prepare. Right. So being extremely prepared for my engagements with those senior executive level discussions. And at the time, I was analyzing point of sale data for retailers and manufacturers. So, yeah, just being very prepared. And also that CEO test. So be succinct, be prepared, know what it is that you want to say, know the story you want to tell. And when you walk in there, the confidence comes.
Was it always your intention to be this visible and prominent within the data industry? Is it you could have been a practitioner that wasn't in a public space and you just focus on the technical skills. So was it always your intention to be such a trailblazer and influencer within the space?
Well, thank you for the kind words. No, absolutely not. As I started doing the work, and particularly when I moved to Canada from South Africa, which would have been around 2013, I was just working. I was just trying to do data analytics, data science work. And after I started my company, Fireside Analytics, that's when I think I saw the power of media, and that if I wanted to get clients and build credibility, then online presented a fantastic platform to be able to gain that. And then one of the other things is, as I created courses and they became popular, then people would find me. So I can say for 100% it was not a deliberate strategy I set out with to do, but then as a function of trying to grow a business, it was a useful path to go down. And once the materials became popular, then it's just a wave that sweeps you and then you find yourself in the water.
Okay. So you said you started your company Fireside Analytics. We're going to jump into what the purpose of the organization is. But I want to first talk about your education. After you'd done your master's, it seemed you went straight into entrepreneurship, starting the organization. How come you didn't go into a typical traditional data role
Good question. Uh, After the master's program, I had quite a bit of work experience already. So looking back, I started my career in retail in 2007. So by that stage, I had been doing data analytics, client facing, working with the databases, working with the data sets for quite some time. So what the master's program did, this is the Business Analytics Master of Science from NYU Stern. What that program did is that it gave me even more confidence, right, to be able to start a company. And at the time, the intention behind the company was, hey, if you have a data set, I will look at it for you and I will write a report, and I'm cheaper than the big consulting firms. That was my elevator pitch. And if you still want to talk to the big consulting firms, you should talk to me first, and I'll tell you what good questions to ask them, right? Because we were in just the beginning stages of this big data revolution. Everybody was, reading the right articles about it. Data is the new oil, the sexiest profession. All of this stuff was starting to come out. I felt certainly in my interactions with different stakeholders that there was something missing. So I thought I could jump into that space and do this consulting work. What I discovered, and to clarify, actually, that consulting work would have been practitioner work, because, and I had a few clients that really pulled me back into core data science work where they had a data set, we'd sign release forms, figure out how to get it out of their database, do models, and then out of those models, some insight that drives a core business decision. So we were doing that with different clients, but the company evolved into data science education, right? Which is more, Shingai, we love what you did. Thanks for the insights. But can you talk to my team about how you did it? Why did you choose that model? Why did you choose to look at the data that way? When you look at this data set, what pops out at you? And so out of that type of request and a very timely partnership with IBM Canada, that is how Fireside Analytics evolved into this business that creates educational programming. So the majority of people that find me and know me online have seen my courses, course videos, have taken an IBM course, etc.
Partnering with IBM, one of the biggest tech companies, is really an achievement and such an early stage. Were there any tricks, any tips?
Richmond, I would love to tell you that it's some secret sauce, that some juju that I sprinkled on that meeting, meeting table or whatever. No, nothing like that. It was, just meeting the team and explaining what I do and who I am. And fortuitously, they were starting a learning platform called cognitiveclass.ai. And at that time, they were looking for people to develop content. So that one I would attribute wholly to right place, right time.
The Computer and the Cancelled Music Lesson. That's the name of your book.
Yes.
The question I'm just going to ask is, why did you decide to write a children's book on data?
Right. So I had a really tough time explaining to my family what I do for a living. And that it was family and friends, especially early on in my career. They would say, you could have been an engineer, you could have been a doctor. What is this data stuff you're doing? Now they get it because data's everywhere and data scientist is being mentioned in every circle. But early on in my career, it really was, oh, here we go again with this conversation about what am I doing with my life. So part of that really drove me to say, well, look, we have to start younger and we have to start earlier. And in particular, my nephew was quite curious about what I do. And after one conversation with him, he would have been about 4 or 5 at the time. It occurred to me that, oh dear, I've got to write something. I've got to put something together for this kid so that firstly, he has exposure to fields like data science from an early age. This can't be something that he only discovers when he gets to university. And then also it just helps articulate what the field is about. And it's a kid's book about solving a problem with data written in children's language. And I've had feedback from parents who bought it who said, oh, thank you so much. This was good for me too.
So you're talking about educating the next generation on data and AI. That's something that we should all be doing. But you're also a massive proponent of upskilling. And I actually wanted to ask you this question. I just finished reading Kai Fu Lee's book, AI 2041. And there was a particular chapter that had inclusion of the opposite of upskilling, which is basically taking employees that have sort of been replaced by robots and putting them in more menial and manual tasks that they could be sort of doing to have some sort of fulfillment within their life. My opinion is within 40 to 50 years, this could become the reality where we're no longer upskilling, but we're actually sort of downskilling, if that's the, for lack of better words. What's your opinion on this particular area?
So that's going to depend entirely on what the demands are of the labor market. So depending on what types of industries we're running and how we're fueling our economies, that's what's going to drive the skills that are required in industry. And I would say certainly for the next little while, it might be the next 20 years, it might be the next 50 years, the digitization of many of our roles and functions, the computerization of many of our tasks and activities in the job has resulted in this explosion in data. And with the explosion in data comes the need for people who are skilled and able to ethically acquire it, engineer it, analyze it, visualize it, and ultimately create value from the data.
And one thing I've also noticed is whenever you define the term data science or anything related to data, online that is, you usually add specifically, and I think purposefully, the term ethically. Um, that begs me to ask, have you seen some unethical ways data has been extracted and used?
Absolutely. And I would say it's not even just a question of having seen them. I think it's the risk is always there. And, one might immediately think of nefarious actors. No, it might also just be you and I, data scientists, bungling along trying to do something. And we end up releasing a data set that miscommunicates, that misinforms, etc. So that risk is always there. And I mentioned that healthy paranoia that I picked up very early on in my career, where testing and checking all the data and making sure that what we're producing is correct and the insights that we've derived are correct is really ingrained in me. I would say that's part of my training. And the ethical acquisition of data, particularly in the digital revolution, I would say this time in our lives with the digitization, computerization, becomes even more important because the data is coming fast and furiously. So all of us have to have that ethical lens. It's not just about having a chief ethics officer at your organization. Really, any practitioner needs to have that ethical lens of what am I being asked to do here? Is this the right thing? And if I'm doing it, am I doing it correctly? Are there any biases in my analyses? Am I representing people fairly? Does the distribution of the data set match the distribution of the community that's going to be served by my model? All these different questions have to be top of mind for practitioners.
We can shift the conversation to representation, or rather underrepresentation. So you've been exposed to several collaborative spaces within the AI and data domain. Can you speak to the level of representation of women within the spaces and how it's developed over the years?
I can. And before we even get there, I think it's also tying into to the last point around the ethical piece is it becomes we don't know what we don't know. So if you and I, Richmond, are creating a vision tool, you and I might arrive at certain biases based on the way we look. That makes it so that tool is not as effective when dealing with the broader population. So that tying into it is, yes, you have ethical considerations and then you have bias as a risk. One of the reasons fundamentally we have to have representation is so that we can be more inclusive with the technology. There are countless examples, every time I stand up and do a keynote somewhere, I've always got a new example because they occur everywhere of instances where the technology just didn't account for someone, where someone was just invisible to a model with consequences. And so, as we start using data science and artificial intelligence more and more, that has to be top of mind. That has to be something that's factored in as part of the process. And just to finish up here, testing for bias should be part of the process. So it's not something you append at the end. It's not something that you do when legal calls you to say, hey, we think we might have an issue here. Someone complained. It should be such that when we develop a product or a tool, that everybody on board says, okay, right, now we test for bias. Do we have balanced classes, right? Simple things that we can do, mathematical tools that we can use to make sure that we are being fair. So there's fairness, there's bias, there's responsible data science and responsible AI, all the different terms. And all of that, one of the risk mitigation strategies you can use to drive all of that is just having representation on your teams, right? Because you can have a Richmond put up their hand and say, hey, I work here. I'm looking at what we're doing and I have a concern, right? And it might not be necessarily, there are different demographics, there are different boxes that you check, but even just your lens of the world, maybe just being closer to your grandparents makes you more sensitive to ageism in some of the tech and tools that we build. Really having that diverse approach, the diverse team is a risk mitigation strategy in the war against bias.
So would you say you're seeing an increase in the representation then, in both from a gender perspective and from a race perspective?
So gender, yes, I do see an increase in representation. It's not to say that women weren't there before. I would say the visibility may not have been there before. So I'm very happy when I go to conferences and work with different teams and work with different companies where just visibly you can see that there's quite a diverse team. So I do see that it's getting better. When I started my career, if I just think to the IT team, which is quite a big team, there were no women. It's one of the first companies where I started doing data science work. There weren't women doing the development work and doing the data science, database management, systems administration kind of work. Whereas now I see many more.
And in terms of race, as it were both Black individuals, how has that sort of improved, or has it just been stagnant over the years? I have my own opinion on this matters, obviously, but I'd like to hear yours.
It's tricky for me to comment specifically because I am originally from Africa. When I was coming up in the field and in the industry, we had Black people doing dev work. So it wasn't such a unicorn to see or meet or know a Black developer or a Black technician, however you want to define technician. So it's my expectation to encounter those people. I will say when I moved to North America, they were far fewer, but I still expected to see them. And I'm pleased to say every so often I do encounter them, but I wouldn't describe them as unicorns. I'd say uh, we have a few. There is work to be done, and I'd say the big area that we need to focus on is that pipeline, because particularly in North America, you do find that kids are not always steered. Black children are not always steered towards careers in STEM and specifically computer science and specifically machine learning, AI, data science, etc. So we have a lot of work to do to build that pipeline.
Yeah. I think there is work going into sort of developing a pipeline that actually increase the representation of Black folks in this particular field, AI. My opinion is AI is one of the most powerful technology, and it's very important that we as Black people are actually part of the table and part of the conversation, or else we're going to be left out. And you were talking about models that essentially where you might be invisible to these models. Right now, the consequences are not that detrimental, even though they are. I mean, there's some very exceptional cases, but in the future, where you might have natural disasters, where you have drones that are equipped with these modules that can identify Black individuals, you might see a drone that doesn't see you under a pile of rubble, and essentially it just tells the rescuers, yeah, there's no one there, but in actual reality, you're under this pile of robbers. But the drone has a bad training data set. The data set is not diverse enough, so you're essentially invisible to the model. And obviously, that's not something that can happen now, but it's definitely a future that.
It is happening now. Let's take something like a classic use case like melanoma detection, right? Melanoma is a type of skin cancer, and there are many researchers around the world who are using images of let's just call it photographs. So think of the idea of taking a picture of your hand from your mobile device, you upload it somewhere, and then a tool tells you, hey, you need to get this checked out, or Richmond, you're fine. This is not, it's nothing serious. Those tools are currently under construction. And it, depending on which part of the world you're in and the regulatory frameworks there that govern medical tools and techniques and devices, they're being used in varied settings, but those tools are there. And if you speak to clinicians about specifically melanoma, it represents differently in dark skinned people versus light skinned people. And so one of the other things that I've been working on more recently is an artificial intelligence program for clinicians. So clinician practitioners. So somebody who's a doctor, nurse, surgeon, a physiotherapist, all manner of people, if they're bucketed under a clinician, how do we get them to really appreciate what's happening with the technology so that when something like that comes in, when somebody walks in and says, hey, we have a melanoma detection app, that they're in an empowered position to say, all right, I want to understand the scores. I want to understand the bias broken down by demographic. I want to understand why do you think this is something good for us to use? And in a scenario where you do establish that, oh, wow, this model works famously well for light-skinned people, what's the plan? Right? Do you still use it? Which becomes really heavy ethical questions, right? If we can detect melanoma in, let's say kids, right? If we can detect it in light-skinned kids, but with 95% accuracy, but it's only 80% accuracy for dark-skinned kids, do we use that tool? Right? Which is a big ethical consideration. So we're getting to that point where the tools and devices are out there. COVID-19 showed us that the race to use technology to solve our medical problems is on. So I don't see it as something far away. I see it as something current. And that's why I invest time in, doing programs like AI for clinicians and clinician leaders.
It's safe to say you are at the forefront of Canada's push to drive data education in both academic institutions and companies that reside within Canada. You've worked with the National Energy Board of Canada. You're on the board of the Institute of Governors in Canada. So you are working with policymakers, people that can make the decision that change the lives of people within Canada. But how does a practitioner in their nation align themselves with the ethical national strategies that their nation is sort of developing? How can I essentially become visible enough for the government in the UK to reach out to me on my opinion on this matter?
So Richmond, I'd say it's the other way around. You might be the one who has to write letters and call people from the government to say, hey, this is something that we need to talk about. We're fortunate enough to live in countries with strong institutions and political structures. You can write a letter to your MP and say, hey, I just want to book some time with you to talk about this topic. And then through that channel, you might find other opportunities to have a broader conversation with policymakers. I'd say my journey was a little bit different. With Fireside Analytics, at some point, I was looking for clients. So that's how I ended up through a series of connections and discussions. Also, I did public talks. The National Energy Board of Canada actually happened after I did a talk at Forward 50, which is a big conference in Canada for policymakers. After that conference, somebody walked up to me and said, I need you to come and speak to my team. So that's how that initial conversation happened. And then subsequently referrals and, somebody else who was there said, we need you to come and speak at the Canada School of Public Service and et cetera. So then that converted into work for my company. But that's specifically how I started. But I'd say there's so many ways that you can start those conversations with policymakers. And there's an appetite there. I think I'm going to say we, because it doesn't matter what your industry is, whether you're a policymaker, whether you're a banker, whether you are a radiographer, whatever your industry is, we're all sort of looking at that horizon and saying technology is becoming more and more prominent in all our sectors. So people can see that wave coming, and there is an appetite to reskill, upskill, and at the very least, just become more knowledgeable and empowered to make those big, important decisions.
Mm. That's very true. And you mentioned reskill and upskill, essentially reinventing yourself. So I guess this leads nicely into my next question, which is around skill development. So within the tech industry, there's usually a shift of focus maybe every 5 to 10 years or where the field is paying attention to. And you've been in this field for a while. I want to ask, how do you constantly reinvent yourself? How do you keep up with the skill and the demand of the industry?
So I'll start with one very tactile suggestion, which is just start embedding yourself in a community. And that could be through social media. So my Twitter account, I follow people that are embedded in these topics. I learn something new all the time. I see these channels for me as part of my work. It's an extension of my work because I can keep up to date with developments in my field. I also still practice, right? So I haven't at any point decided I'm going the full social media route. I'm going to become an influencer. No, I have never said I'm going to become a full speaker and I just do conferences and talks. No, I'm fundamentally still an interdisciplinary person. So still do the talks. I still do projects which involve coding, still have to do that to keep my skills fresh. And that's how you discover when things change, because the package that you used to love using for this particular visualization has now been deprecated, and now you are lost for 2 days while you try to figure out what's the replacement. And then once you figure that out, you get going. So it is important to keep your pencil sharp, just in case. And the best way is, establish a community, follow the right people, and then also keep doing things.
And looking at things from a senior executive or decision maker's point of view, how would they essentially tap into the talent within those communities? Because I know you do inform these individuals on how to attract AI talent. So, what is the best approaches to actually get the top researchers or the top practitioners or engineers into your company?
On many occasions, this is something I famously repeat anytime. The job descriptions that we put out into the world should really have a good description of what the work will be.
Mm.
So our industry is still trying to figure out what to call us. So Richmond, you might be a data scientist. Shanghai might be a data scientist, but our core areas of focus are different, right? You might be, actually, I think you told me it was you want to move into engineering.
Machine learning architects.
That's right. Machine learning architecture, right? So that's a specialization. If you're going to apply for a data scientist job, get there. And then, oh, we just want you to write a few SQL queries and a few visualizations. You're not going to be happy in that role. So the best thing that we can do when we attract talent and to make sure we attract the right talent is to give them enough information that they can make the decision. So there was the strategy that's still being used where HR people would dump every word they could find associated with machine learning into the job description and hope for the best. So we want you to have Pig, Hive, Scala. We want you to be an expert on Hadoop, Slurm. We want you to be an expert on Spark. We want you to be an expert on analytics. And you have to have presentation skills and you have to be a great communicator. And here's another list of programming languages, Java, C++, etc. that we expect. I mean, it makes no sense. So we need to stop doing that practice. That practice should just cease immediately, and instead replace that with what work do we want you to do? And it might be Richmond. We're trying to set up a data lake. We have data sets in these 5 departments in our organization. This one is numeric predominantly. This one is it's text data, and this one is trying to marry the two, etc. This is a legacy database. We stopped using it, but it's got all the historical stuff that we need to link to the first two, all of that good, messy stuff. If you can get closer to telling me that in the job description, I can make a more informed assessment about how I can help your company. And that way, when I'm coming in for the interview, I can now explain how I would do it, the work that I've done to demonstrate competence in that work.
So another common filter that hiring managers or recruiters use is the academic qualification of the candidate, right? So for a field such as AI, machine learning, it's almost typical to come across someone with a master's. You have a master's, I have a master's. How important is it to have that such a high level of education to get in a role? I just want to get your opinion on this. Is it very important for me to go to university to obtain a master's to become a machine learning practitioner? How important is it?
So it's not a requirement, but it does help. So one of the reasons I ended up getting a master's in business analytics was because I wanted a piece of paper that could explain what I was doing. Right. I mentioned that my family used to give me a hard time about what does she work? What does she do exactly? Over and over again. Like I've explained it to you, to my grandmother, but she's still, what is it you do again? So, those kinds of fun conversations translate into the workplace when you can't explain what it is that you do. So when I found the business analytics program, um, it was now the job titles and the roles, analytics, data scientists, etc., were becoming more mainstream. I could explain what I did, but now the industry was like, oh, we recognize what you're saying, right? As opposed to, this cloudy look on a recruiter's face where they're just like, no, I don't know what you're saying to me. And my expectation is that a data scientist is 50-year-old, white, and male, and you're showing up Shanghai. No, that's, yeah. So in some instances, I can see somebody just completely shutting the door before I've even opened my mouth, because at that point, I'd say it was such a strange and unusual thing to find a data scientist A and to find a data scientist that looked like me.
Okay. And we spoke about how executive levels, individuals, and directors could attract talent. And I guess another sort of obstacle they have to go over is how to retain the talent within the company. What are some strategies that you've seen that has actually worked for the folks you speak to?
I think folks need to decide what they want to achieve in an organization. And then the organization needs to decide what they want you to do when you come in, which is one of the tip that I shared with you. And if you have an alignment of those two things, then you have happy employees and you have happy companies, right? It's when there's a misalignment. There's actually a joke that says the job description will say AI, but what they mean is machine learning. And when you get there, it's Excel. So there's this misalignment between what the work entails and what the individual wants to do. I would say broadly, the research is suggesting that people want to make a difference and have impact, all the traditional stuff that makes you happy to be in a place of work, to be valued, for your work to be valued, etc. And I think we're getting better at structuring our artificial intelligence and machine learning teams so that people can have a voice, can express their creativity sometimes. IT was not always known as the place where creative people go. But if you're doing machine learning, if you're doing AI architecture, then you can be a creative kind of person to be able to knit together data sets and process flows in ways that work magically. So I think alignment is key. And then from a macro scale, we kind of touched on it earlier, which is that it's all about the labor market and what the economies that we're running need. So if we have that match, like we do now, there's a bit of a boom in terms of data science roles, then we're good. And then when somebody gets to that job, if you give them a good experience, they'll stay.
And as well as a boom in terms of data science role, there's also a boom in terms of, or an increase in the demand for AI regulation, AI policy, AI safety. I've seen a lot of prominent individuals actually move from creating startups that focus on creating AI tools to more focusing on the regulatory aspect of AI, because this in the next, say, 5 to 10 years will be what policymakers might be looking into. And they're already looking into now with the sort of like the introduction of self-driving cars. And this leads me to my next question. What is the next for you? Does the next 5 years look like career-wise?
So there's a lot going on in my world career wise. And without disclosing too much at this point, I'd say watch the space.
That is the way to get people.
Watch this space is as far as I'll go in terms of telling you my plans. But rest assured, I do have plans, and there's projects in the pipeline of cool ways to express data science education and bring many people on board and be inclusive. So the same sort of pillars that I tend to focus on, entrepreneurship, education, data science, machine learning, AI, and policy. You're going to find all those ingredients in my next 5-year journey.
Yeah, that is actually an exciting statement. Is it just looking at your online personal brand? I was just thinking, wow, Shingai, you do a lot within this space. So how do you even manage your time? You're AI educator, you work with big companies, you have online presence as well. You're speaking to executive. I watched your talk and you were on the panel with one of the former CEO of GE Canada. I used to work as an intern at GE Capital in UK. And it's incredible. So the question is, how do you do all this and how do you manage your time?
I manage my time, Richmond. I manage my time.
It's any special tips or tricks or anything?
Uh, I think being deliberate about the things that you want to do. I do have quite a good barometer for what I say yes to and what I say no to.
Mm.
And I'm getting better and better all the time at saying no to things. So if it's not aligned, if it doesn't meet core values, if it's not leaning towards that combination, that nexus of topics that I mentioned, education, data science, entrepreneurship, policy, then it makes it quite easy for me to see which road I must go down. So I'd say that's one good tip is you got to be very deliberate. Like these things you're going to have many opportunities thrown at you. People want you to come and speak here, speak there, do a podcast here, do a podcast there, and you just have to really be deliberate. Also investigate the people, right? So you and I have a mutual connection in O'Reilly Media. So, that's a nice way to be able to grow that ecosystem and to grow that channel. Be deliberate and say no to things. You don't have to say yes to every single thing that pops up. That will kill your time,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
It will, as in this week was the first time I've been in this industry for about, let's say 2 years and 2 months within the AI industry. And this week was the first time I said no to an opportunity. And I felt relieved. It was,
It's the worst. It's terrible when you've said yes to something that doesn't exactly feel right, and now you've committed. It weighs on everything else that you're trying to do. So be deliberate. You have to, otherwise your time just gets sucked away, and as you say, you don't have time to do the things you really want to.
I have this mentality where I feel like I might just miss out and I need to grab every single opportunity while I'm young. And I've got this high expectations I have for myself. And obviously these expectations are basically coming from the people around you. And obviously me as a Black person, I want to show people that you can get to the top and how you can get to the top. And sometimes it's a bit not hard to say no, but you feel like it's your responsibility to say yes. But you're right, it does put you at a detriment if you spread yourself too thin and you might not achieve that overarching goal that you're aiming for yourself. And this actually leads me into like my closing questions. Who do you have around you that motivates you, that pushes you to the next level?
I will always credit my parents. I am a child of both parents in that my father's an entrepreneur. And so I grew up seeing him with an incredible work ethic that he still has, well into his sunset years, if I could say that. He's still going, 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 going. And I've asked him, so what's your retirement plan? And he laughs because there isn't one. The man is going to keep going until he stops. And so that entrepreneurship and that drive and that work ethic came from my dad, and just sage advice where just knowing that I can think through a problem is something that I got from my father. And then my mom is encouraging. If I tell her I'm thinking about doing this thing, she'll say it's yours, it's done. Right. So it's funny and we laugh about it, but it really puts you in that positive mindset of she sees it as possible because why not? And then I see it as possible. So my mom's an educator. She's a lecturer at a university. She's now retired. But both of them have been outstanding cheerleaders and drivers in my professional career. My whole upbringing has led me to this point, and I will always credit my parents for um, what they put into me because, yeah, I see it every day.
Parents are usually the foundation of the confidence that kids usually have. That's where it starts from. The parents build up your confidence. And I guess it sort of like comes back full circle to why you've equipped parents with a book that can essentially build that confidence within their children to be potentially very useful and successful within a society that values data. And yeah, it does, in a way, it comes back full circle. And I do have the experience of having parents that push you to beyond your limit, but mine was sort of different. So I used to go to school in Nigeria, primary and a bit of secondary school, and we're always ranked. And I used to
Yeah.
come in the middle, and I'll go home, show my rank to my mom, and my mom would say, "The person that got first, do they have two heads?" And it's like, basically what she's saying is there is no difference from
There's no difference. Yeah.
when you don't get it first. And I'm like, yeah, yeah. I feel like that's just so like gone with me throughout my life, even to this point. I look at other practitioners, I'm like, whatever you can do, I can do as well.
Possible. Yep. It's completely possible. And I will also share, look, it wasn't always easy, right? When parents give you tough feedback and tough love and push you. And when you say, oh, no, I didn't like the test or something, and they say, excuse me, you didn't what? And they send you back in the ring to go figure it out. I think it obviously at the time, as particularly as a teenager, I had opinions about their parenting style. But now that I'm older, I couldn't thank them enough for what they did. And it was that empowerment piece. And, just learning that through hard work, perseverance, etc., you can reach, limits you never even imagined for yourself.
Okay. And I think that's a very good way to end this conversation. Thanks a lot, Shingai. Thanks for having this conversation with me.
No problem, Richmond. Thank you.